only 24% of the organizations clearly explain their overall goals or perspective about total rewards programs and design. So people are somewhat at a loss. Like, what are you talking about? Right?
Yeah.
Welcome to Ready Set Exec, the podcast where we sit down with executives across North America to unpack their business, leadership, and expertise.
And every other week, join us for Market Watch, all things hiring, real insights, and no fluff. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Raj Sinha, a global total rewards and human capital strategist with more than 20 years of experience advising CEOs, CHROs, and boards across industries. Raj specializes in transformational compensation design, performance management, and organizational structures that align people strategy with corporate goals. His career spans global roles at companies like OneCall, Ansell, Endurance, and Koya Kiran, and now consults with CCI Consulting, helping organizations navigate executive compensation, IPO readiness, and large-scale HR transformation. Good to have you on the pod today, Raj.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
And, we were doing a little preamble there about a little bit about the evolution of total rewards and how that's changed over time. Now going into 2026, maybe you can give us a little bit of your journey and then where we are going into in Q1 next year for total rewards.
Absolutely. So let me just quickly give everybody a little summary of my background to the extent that I always talk about the salient features of my personal as well as my professional background.
Yep.
I grew up in different countries, so I characterize myself as a culturally agile. Okay. So I can connect with people. I grew up in India and also spent a lot of time in England, so I can talk about cricket as well as soccer, if you will, or football, as if you're a purist.
Yep.
And at the same time, I've also lived in America for a long time, specifically in New York, and worked in global companies. So I've worked in the Middle East as well as different industries all over the place, life sciences, as well as looking at financial services, technology, and so forth. The way I look at myself, in a sense that, let me just encapsulate that in a very succinct way. I'm a big fan of, John, you may definitely know of him. His name is Dr. Harry Mintzberg. He is a very famous Canadian scholar. And he essentially talks about the fact that we're all human beings. Let's not use the word human resources in an effort to commodify human resources. Let's just work with people as a people function and at the same time bring along the overall aspect or thought process of how to work within a human community, which is excellent. I agree with that. So from that perspective, let me just delve into a little bit in terms of the total rewards situation or global reward situation. It's essentially, it's been around since the 70s, in America at least, but in the past, it was not so prominent. It kind of like the overall concept kind of like encapsulates the how to attract, motivate, and retain employees by offering a strategic combination of compensation benefits, recognition, work-life effectiveness, and career development. It's kind of like, of course, it changes as we move along. And specifically in terms of the overall few things that changed drastically is the fact that the COVID that impacted all over the world. So the overall healthcare awareness is still extremely prominent. To put them on also the corporate volatility is also due to a great extent our economic conditions and a global situation is kind of like with different aspects. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the economics is global economy is slightly volatile at this point. So people are always human beings are obviously we're all human beings. We're basically concerned about two things. One is our economic well-being and healthcare well-being. So these are essentially the two areas of focus that two areas have transpired over the years. So I am essentially, as I am going through consulting, projects, as well as working with global companies, as well as regular corporations, addressing these in a way that the employees can understand two things. One is like how we are being taken care of, as Dr. Mintzberg said. Secondly, I've also found out from a recent survey, which was done by Korn Ferry, that only 24% of the organizations clearly explain their overall goals or perspective about total rewards programs and design. So people are somewhat at a loss, like, what are you talking about, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing is, I guess, I firmly believe in one thing, again, going back to Dr. Mintzberg, is the fact that employees' experience, I would characterize it as X, is just as important as consumers or customers' experience, CX. CX and EX should be together. And we
Yeah.
should give equal importance to CX and EX. And because the employers should actually strive for employer of choice, not just performance management or one-dimensional aspects of it. We're all in it together, so to speak,
Yeah.
So that's the introduction. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And it's interesting because I was actually talking with another person, Dr. Bruno Signecco, which is someone I talked to this morning. Actually, we recorded with him. And we were talking about CX, about creating that customer experience and the customer journey being so important. And we were talking also about compassionate leadership when it comes to that, right? So that really fits into this conversation where we're now talking on the other side of EX, employee experience, and how companies are not paying it as much attention. It's for many companies as an afterthought. They haven't built out the function for total rewards, and then they're not pairing their culture with their reward system and their compensation systems that they have, and how culture is intertwined with that. Maybe you can kind of give us a little bit about how is that inseparable, culture and employee engagement, and your the way you compensate and reward people.
That's a wonderful question. Thanks, John. Let me just tell you, I'll give you two specific examples. Okay. That's number one. You actually mentioned leadership. So this is a few years back. I was actually reading about something that described leadership. And I mean, you must have read it too. They talked about the fact that, how do you define leadership? Leadership is essentially something that you do in the event of an emergency to take care of everybody's well-being. Emergency is the key word. And then the folks who are the management gurus, they recommended the leaders are encouraged to think all the time in the event of an emergency, so that people are agile, okay? People are adaptable.
Yeah.
People are quick to respond. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples, actually. Also, before I start this, there are two concepts this. One is called sociability, and one is called solidarity. Solidarity is associated more with the corporate culture because we all in it together. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me just, and this is a little tricky, but let me just tell you anyway. So back in the day, I mean, it's still there, the Myers-Briggs things.
Yeah.
I attended Myers-Briggs, this seminar, and of course for corporation, and this person who's teaching and everything, because they also talked about ENTJ, ENTP, and all these different personality types. So we understood it. We all nodded our heads. And then this person basically said that, okay, if you're ENTJ, stand in one line, one group. If you're ENTP, the moment I basically went through the whole process, and I was thinking, that is kind of like, I mean, it's like human beings are not just ENTJ or ENTP. I mean, we're a combination of everything. And putting them in different groups is not the best idea because we're all human beings, right? So that is the first, person that I want to talk about. This is what it basically got into my head. Secondly, what happened was 2009. We were talking about the emergency, what you do, the leaders are supposed to do, and all that stuff. You definitely know this. Everybody knows about this. 2009, the U.S. airline plane took off from LaGuardia Airport. And it had, the birds got into their,
Yeah.
engine and everything else. And they're saying that, they're basically doing a SWOT analysis, obviously. I'm not blaming everybody. You do this and you do that and blah, blah, blah. And Sully Sullenberger, Miracle on the Hudson, he thought like a leader. I don't have much time. I need to save everybody. What he did, he basically landed on the river, Hudson River.
Yeah.
And everybody was safe. That's leadership. I mean, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Okay. And I'll give you another example. It happened 2 years ago. What happened was, we all know about the major global financial corporation called UBS, big financial corporation. So what happened was, this is a good combination of solidarity and sociability, so to speak. What comes first, right? Are you a human resources person, or are you a human community, as Dr. Mintzberg talks about? So one of the guys, I mean, this is nothing secret, and it came out all over the place. I can basically mention the name. The name of the individual, he's an executive. His name is Bill Carroll. The other person is Lane Strumtoff. I mean, maybe I'm mispronouncing it. I apologize. The other lady is the human people function lady called Jane Schwartzberg.
Okay.
Anyway, kind of long story short, Bill was having kidney issues. It runs in his family. So he was, talking to his coworkers, and he's going to the doctor, this, that, and his daughter's wedding was coming along. So he wanted to experience the daughter's wedding. We all do, right? And it just makes me so emotional. So he was talking about this and during lunchtime. And finally, I mean, they're very good friends, Jane and Bill. So Jen was getting increasingly kind of involved with this, and she was getting frustrated because Bill was going through all different areas to get a kidney donations. It's not working. So Jen said something that I can relate to. Jen said, Bill, just chill. I'm going to get you an expletive kidney. Just don't worry about it. And Bill was very emotional. He was like, oh my God, how can you do that? He said, Jen said, I'm going to go and talk to the president of our company. And the president of the company listened to the whole thing. He said, absolutely. It's all about, we're all human beings. Let's just go for it, and immediately start an initiative within our organization to get a kidney or kidney donor for Bill. And ultimately, they ran the whole thing inside the organization. And there was another managing director whose name is Lane. Stumloff is probably the best way to pronounce it. He basically signed up. Can you imagine? And we all have two kidneys. We all know that. But giving away one kidney for a coworker, how magnanimous is that?
Yeah.
How caring is that in this day and age, So, of course, they had to go through the overall, testing, and company paid for everything. Total rewards. Okay. It's like, just no expenses spared. Do it. Save his life. And both of them. So they just basically ended up going through, they met the families, they spent some time together, ended up, basically socializing with each other, ended up having the kidney removed and, moving it to Bill's area.
Yep.
And it was successful. And then Bill attended his daughter's wedding, and Len was a special guest.
Nice.
That's what it's all about.
So, I mean, that's a great example and an emotional one and so on, but day to day, I would say that's kind of a outlier. I mean, that doesn't happen often, let's say, right? So day to day though, right, for your average company out there that's trying to figure out, how does pay for performance work? Is our compensation helping our culture? What do you recommend for companies in terms of, for example, what percentile employer are you, right? If you stack up 100 employers, where do you fall in the compensation level? And where should we be? I mean, I've read studies saying you want to be around the 70% percentile, because If you do too high, then you're overpaying. If you do too low, you're losing talent to your competitors, right? There's that sweet spot of rewarding people, but also not overpaying for the talent you have either. How does that fit into culture? Because I think the top performing cultures that I've seen out there are wanting to be around 80% or higher even. They don't mind paying extra because they say, you know what, we want everybody to be fully motivated and so on, right? But it's not just compensation, right? It's also the total rewards available with that, which a lot of perks and things like that, vacation. These are all
Sure.
things we sometimes take for granted, but they also affect people's lives. Even just having flexibility with hybrid work could be a reward, I would say,
Absolutely.
for some
Absolutely.
people, right?
So if I may just jump in, few things you mentioned, very good, very astute points. First of all, let's talk about pay. Okay, how much we get paid. Okay,
Yeah.
and pay is, of course, it's actually two different components of pay. Three different components of pay. One is base pay, and of course the year-end bonus. Year-end bonus is based on your overall, what did you do that year, so to speak. So in technical terminology, that's called realized pay. So it's year to year to year. Okay.
Yeah.
Realized pay. And the next one is, it's not for all the employees. It's called realizable pay. So how does that work? So basically what you do is that take a look at on a global basis, the corporate line of sight is very key aspect, to the extent that it's typically on a global basis, best practices about 6 levels, right? What is corporate line of sight? It basically means at your level or at my level, we can basically see our contribution on the company's bottom line very easily. Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's an impact. So then that's at the lower level, so to speak. I hate to use the word lower level, but notwithstanding, when you go up the ladder at this end, if you're CEO or CFO, the named executive officer, that's the terminology for Securities and Exchange Commission, and then in Canada and in England and also in other areas, they're actually called key management personnel. The remuneration report, okay.
Yeah.
That's for the publicly traded companies. So that at the top level, it's all about he or she, meaning CEO, named executive officer, key management personnel. They are the company. Okay. So they don't have any individual component. It's all about the realizable pay. So that's number one. The second thing is, overall, back in the day, this is going back, you're very familiar with this. We actually had in 2008, in that range, financial breakdown. Okay.
Yeah.
The entire thing, the Lehman Brothers and all these companies went out of business and so forth. And then came up, it's called say on pay, to the extent that in terms of the shareholders are essentially the owners of the company because they own the shares, right? So they actually have a right after this incident, the say on pay. In America, it came out as a result of the guys. It's called Dodd-Frank Act. The
Yeah.
two legislators, right? So you'll have to go through that every year to make sure that the company's performance is consistent with the pay that the executives, essentially top 5 CEO, CFO, and another 4 or 5 executives are receiving. In America, it's non-binding. That means that even if you get a low percentage of the say on pay, the shareholders vote, it creates an reputational risk for you. I mean, people will talk about it. How come the company's results are awful and these guys are making a lot of money?
Yeah.
It's non-binding. But in Europe, in certain, like Euronext, for example, in France, and I also worked for Australian ASX, is binding. So what happens is that if you fail the say on pay 2 years in a row, it's called the 2 strikes. So because the shareholders and the top executives, the directors are essentially fiduciaries of the shareholders, right?
Yeah.
Fiduciary. they immediately get sacked if you have two things. So that's the overall regulations on a global basis, right? Some are binding, some are non-binding. We basically are right now, we've made it after the overall, the CM pay came along in 2010. What happened was in America, let's talk about America, for example. What happened is the fact that we also came up with a concept called CEO pay ratio. So you take a
Yes.
look at the CEO pay as opposed to the overall, rank and file employees. That's one. We also included ESG associated how things should be done. Okay. That's another rating that you would give. And the other interesting thing is the institutional investors play a major role in this. And I'll give you one name. I mean, you're familiar with it. You all are familiar with it. It's BlackRock.
Yeah.
BlackRock is the world's $1 trillion in IDO's track. Enormous financier. And the guy who is the head of BlackRock, his name is Larry Fink.
Yeah.
Larry Fink basically is a big proponent of say on pay. And he also talks about ESG, a lot. And he actually, every year, I'm a big fan of that, he basically creates a report to the entire organizations like they own, and it's also basically gets published all over the place. It's called the stewardship report. Because as a corporation, as a CEO or like a named executive officer, you are the steward of that company. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a stewardship report, and it explains everything that you need to do. And also it basically articulates the overall duties and responsibilities of the directors, right? Because you're fiduciaries. And just to digress for a quick second, in Australia, they have the Corporations Act. And that, because in London, they also have a similar act. They basically talk about the fact that if you are a director of one specific company for more than 15 years, then it gets very difficult for you to distinguish between the corporation and your role. You know what I'm saying? It's a
Yeah.
conflict of interest takes place. So these are the things that happen. But I also finish up by saying that I'm actually a big fan of the whole process. Shareholder, say on pay votes are absolutely necessary.
Well, more accountability, right? More accountability for the leadership to not just pay themselves whatever they want, and then meanwhile they're laying off tens of thousands to
It's
boost the
true.
share
That,
price for the
that's
quarter. I mean, we've
right.
seen it.
That's
You
true.
know, it's and those stories hit the news. I think what's
Yeah.
interesting is it's become, because of the amount of information out there now and the
Yeah.
quickness of media, companies are getting shamed when they're doing things like that. Oh, look, the CEO got $100 million pay package. Meanwhile, they let go 30,000 employees. That $100 million pay, if they gave 50 million, it would have covered the employees' salaries to keep them. So, it's just, it looks really bad. And I mean, it's good to see that to an extent, because I think the greed, we've seen the greed become exponential now, right? So in the 70s, I think the ratio was 1 to 100 CEO pay to employee, or
Yeah.
around that.
Yeah.
And now it's something like 1,000 to 1 of what the low, let's say, entry level employee makes compared to the CEOs. 1,000 to 1, or several magnitudes.
Exponential.
Yes, it's growing. It's to accelerate in that way. So how do you, as someone that's going into total rewards, and you're thinking about equity, let's say, in terms of pay for the whole team there, and creating incentives. We were talking about sort of the percentile of employee, where do companies want to be, and how do they create, let's say, compensation models that seem that are not going to, are going to face scrutiny and will be okay. They're not going to be
Sure.
ostracized in the media for
Yeah.
outrageous pay packages and golden parachutes and all the stuff that
I
people saw
think
in
that's a
2008, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And let me just tell you something. There are two global companies, because all the shareholder owned companies, publicly traded companies, actually every year they're supposed to do the proxy, which is called, in America, we call it DEF 14A. Okay. That's the name of the forum. And within that, there's a place called, it's called compensation discussion and analysis. That's what I prepare with everybody else, right?
Yeah.
It's a collaborative task. And there are two corporations which are global. One is called ISS, and the other one is Institutional Shareholder Services. Other is called Glass Lewis. They're global. What they do is that they actually advise the shareholders, so they also have their own parameters. Let me give you the parameters. The governance, okay? The governance is, this is an ISS rule. You're going to take a look at the audit, because otherwise people are going to just dip in whichever way they want. Like the other one is compensation. That needs to be benchmarked based on, if the size of a company, they're measured by two things. One is industry, as well as the market cap, as well as the revenue. Because market cap doesn't really mean anything, because PE multiples and all that stuff. You got to take a look at EBITDA, okay? And EPS. I mean, it's a combination of things. That's what I do, because I have a management degree from NYU, so I'm very much of a finance person. Take a look at that. So audit, so that people are not making stuff up, like SOX 404 is the
Yeah.
key aspect. The second thing is that. The third thing is also the taking a look at your overall, as I was telling you, that compensation wise, they also have to take a look at if benchmarked and everything else. The other one is the overall, the way the director's composition. So you cannot just have a director who is basically doesn't have any idea about compensation. He or she is there because it's like a networking event, so they got into that. So you'll have to take a look at that. So that's number one. You got to take a look at their competency and everything else. The third thing is basically also DEI is another aspect. So
Yeah.
basically, it's called the governance score. Okay, and each one of these, it changes every year, obviously. So basically, the way it works is that for each one of these pillars, which is audit, compensation, and so forth, it goes from 1 to 10, each one of them, score-wise. If it is 5-ish or a little bit 6, that's fine. Closer it gets to 10, then you'll have to start looking at it, because the ISS and everybody else basically advise the shareholders as well. Take a look at it, and especially the institutional shareholders.
Yeah.
So that, and therefore, so I just wanted to tell you, you definitely have seen this, but if you look up any corporation on the Yahoo Finance, and they basically actually at the end, the profile page, they basically tell everybody's salary and the compensation level, all the top executives, and they also give you the rating, ISS rating. Okay, so that's very key thing to, if you're getting into this. But let me just move forward with one more thing that would complete this discussion. Obviously, now we have a new administration. So as a result, we also have a new Securities and Exchange Commissioner. His name is Paul Atkin.
Yeah.
So he recently, meaning last summer, in June timeframe, he had a major session with top executives of major corporations, and he got feedback from them. So he's expected to. Actually, I was in the Wall Street Journal there 2 days ago. There was an article that he wrote himself. He wants to basically make the disclosures. I mean, less disclosures. That's what he wants to do. Make it more, numbers game kind of a thing. And second thing is he took out DEI. Okay, that's gone. This is all about America. And the third thing is he took out from ESG, he took out the G, the governance aspect of it, just E and S. So sustainability and environment and all that stuff is there. So in other words, that report is supposed to be out in April of next year. But because of the fact that I've been doing this for a long time, that publication date is, I would characterize it as aspirational. It's a bit delayed because there are too many things inside. But the proxy time is coming coming up right now because the end of the year and so forth. By April in America, we'll have to submit. So the best way to characterize this or encapsulate this is from pay perspective. It's slightly, again, I think the word that I'm using too much is volatile, but I think the disclosures are going to be less. There are, of course, pros and cons associated with that. We don't know what's going to happen down the road.
I guess it's sort of wait and see. With whenever there's change, it's there's always good and bad aspects of it. So it's,
Of course.
have to wait and see how that plays out.
Absolutely.
So for someone that's, let's say, a mid-level comp and ben person that is looking to get into the full total rewards as an executive and build their career, what kind of advice would you give them in terms of, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of learnings to have in terms of how to navigate boards, SEC, like there's a lot of things that would not be for a mid-level person that's maybe just doing comp for a small team, right? And that kind of thing. So how do you develop those skill sets? What have you done over your career to sort of level up to get to the global total rewards, which is there's a lot of legalese, a lot of finance involved. Just from what I've heard already is just the amount of things you got to navigate country to country, different rules in Europe,
Absolutely.
especially, right?
Absolutely. So let me just tell you this few things and stop me if I'm just talking too much. Number one is my perspective is I'm not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I ask very kind of like very commonsensical question, which is, where are we going with this? Okay.
Yeah.
That's number one. Okay. Why are we doing this? So from that perspective and expanding it to slightly more than that question thing, is basically you need to understand the business. Why are we doing this? Each business have different aspects of it and different like goals and business goals and like people goals and so forth. And like for example, life insurance is all about, not life insurance, sorry, like in terms of looking at the biotech companies and life sciences companies, it's like coming up with unmet needs, right? Unmet needs of what needs to be done from healthcare. I mean, the basic thing was that happened during the COVID vaccine situation.
Yeah.
The mRNA goals, I mean, people didn't know what mRNA was. So that's something that you got to understand this. So then on top of that, key aspect of looking at your performance management is the thing is you got to take a look at the KPIs. Okay. What are the KPIs? The second thing is, this is how you basically then take a look at the goals and then basically do performance management. The next thing is, after you set the KPIs, then the next step is based on the KPI is OKR. Like what's going to happen? Because otherwise everything is so very amorphous. What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And then, okay, we met the goal. Is it full-fledged? Everything is fine. Something needs to be done. Then comes the critical aspect, defining the threshold, target, and maximum. That is absolutely important, goal setting. So if you have goals and KPI goals or OKR goals, you always tell people that, again, we'll have to go through the entire corporate line of sight and everything else. At a lower level, the corporate line of sight is low because their goals are not impacting the underlying goals, corporate goals. The individual component is high. Okay.
Yeah.
So you basically take a look at, individual component is high, but then you take a look at, is this just the threshold or is it target or maximum and so forth, right? But as you go up the ladder, your goal, your percentages will shift. The corporate percentage will go up and the individual component will go down. Again, it'll get impacted by the corporate line of sight. You'll take a look at the threshold, target, and maximum and so forth, and you'll get rewarded on the basis of that. But the fact of the matter is, this is what I personally think needs to be changed, but a lot of people are talking about it and some people have already changed it, but notwithstanding, it's not foolproof. And this is a very, what's the right way to describe this? sensitive topic. The performance management that bosses talk to their employees about is not foolproof.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And in most cases, what happens is that normative biases come into play. So we got to kind of like get rid of it. I mean,
Maybe expand a little bit about normative bias, because it seems a little technical.
okay. Let me just go back to when I was in school in Connecticut. Let me just start from there and tell me if I'm talking too much. The guy who was a professor of philosophy, Dr. Keenan, Columbia graduate, he said, "What is objectivity?" And of course, we didn't know. It's like, oh, we're
Mhm.
going to be objective. So then he said, objectivity is nothing but a pool of subjectivity. And of course, we didn't understand it. But over the years, of course, we're not exactly neophytes anymore. We just realized because in a diverse society, in a global society, we have, I'm trying to be very careful in terms of terminology, demographics based heuristics.
Okay.
You get
Fair
it,
enough.
right?
Yeah, I mean, like it, as you said before, right? We putting people into boxes is with labeling, putting people into boxes is not healthy, because we're all unique individuals. We're all special in our own ways and our own intricacies. Let's say it's funny because I did take the testing, and I think I was ENTJ or something, and I was like, yeah, but I also have certain traits of some others, but not as strong, maybe. But in sometimes certain scenario, just we could definitely are more than the sum of our parts, right? There's more to us, so
Absolutely.
can
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
And two things, let me just talk about this for two quick things. Number one is I'm also an ENTJ, by the way. Just too much information, right? But at the same time, we also have to take a look at situational aspects of what happens and how we react to that. And there is a Chinese proverb that I am very fond of because I'm cross-cultural. It's like my wife grew up in England, and it's like, so how it works. So there's a leader. It's the whole thing. I was getting to the summit, like Mount Everest, for example,
Yeah,
right? So there's this guru. He's got a whole bunch of disciples. He's teaching them, go this way, that way, blah, blah. You go there, the disciples, they go there, and it gives me goosebumps. You are at the top of the summit, Mount Everest, and you're looking around, congratulating each other, and you're looking for the guru. The guru is not there. That's teaching what to do in the absence of having a leader. Be on your own.
yeah. Well, it makes sense. So, we're talking a little bit about executives and just progressing their careers, right? And using certain methodologies in terms of how they approach problems. I think you're right. You got to teach them how to fish, and there's a lot of skill sets they're going to learn along the way. Technology is also now accelerated a lot of this, because now we have systems, HRS systems to support with data, and Power BI dashboards. I've seen so many of
Yes.
these, right? And then you're having AI now come into play in terms of building out these systems. As a total rewards person, do you see AI and these new systems as a benefit? Do you see it as taking the humanity away from a lot of this, or is it only helping you do your job better? And how are you leveraging?
That's a very good question. That's a good segue. Let me just tell you this. It's not my opinion. I mean, it's all over the paper. Okay. I'll just give you one example. I personally think that AI is wonderful, but AI is still very much in the nascent stage right now.
Yeah,
Very much. Okay. But at the same time, folks are looking at it from an overall economic perspective. That's why we're building enormous data centers all over the place, right? So at the end of the day, in August, what happened was Sam Altman, OpenAI guy, OpenAI basically released this new version. It's called GPT, and it was full of exaggerated stories and all kinds of wrong information. So after they released it, basically immediately Sam Altman himself came in and basically apologize. So that's number one. So it's not sentient yet, it's not sacrosanct yet, and it's not a
Yeah, it's a
panacea
language
yet.
model. I think people need to know the difference between a Gen AI and language model, which is what we still
Exactly.
have.
Yes.
So sure.
Those things are important. Secondly, the other thing is going to tell you is that Anthropic, for example, they basically did this 2 months ago, just paid few $1 million to authors for taking their books away, well, and basically using it for their own purpose. So there are a lot of, and also Google came up with this Gemini, their own version of AI. That's actually going beyond OpenAI to a certain extent. So bottom line is two things looking at it is that if you look at American models, Western, if you will, OpenAI and also Anthropic, they're very good with generating descriptions and analysis and so forth, right? But the Chinese model
Like
is much
DeepSeek.
better technological aspects. So, but OpenAI, in terms of coming back to like people functions, I personally think about it as a very good operational tool, like an analysis. But you're going to basically be like anybody else. If you have somebody if yourself is doing analysis, it can be written with mistakes. So you
Yeah.
cannot take everything as the best there is. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're all trying to adapt in a sea of change. Things are rapidly changing. You have to stay on top of things so much. And so that only makes your life more difficult because not only are you worried about individual countries and rules and evolving landscapes, we had a great conversation with Jamie Conrad, another HR executive, about just the benefits plans state by state because of the changing landscape with rules and regulations, women's health, and all these kinds of things, and how you got to, as a compensation person, anyone in total rewards, anyone that's involved in benefits, I mean, it's you got to be on top of things all the time, right? Things are changing
Absolutely.
rapidly, right?
Let me also, if I may interject before we finish, the country profiles, which I do too, because I have to do part of my job. Just to give you an example, let's talk about India, for example.
Yeah.
India has the highest population in the whole world right now. And number two, they also have the highest percentage of millennial workforce. They're restless, of course. They will
Yeah.
go anywhere else for a few $100 or whatever. That's a very key thing. So we also have hub cities, like you have Bengaluru, and you also have, like Hyderabad, the South India, and so forth. That's number one. So we've got to be very cognizant of that. When you're designing something, I'm talking to somebody actually, I spoke to them yesterday. You've got to design something. You've got to be cognizant of that. So you cannot just look at Radford survey or some other survey and do the comp ratio. That's not going to work. Okay. Second thing is, let's take China, for example. China is, of course, a very big country. China actually, they have two river deltas. One is called the Yangtze River Delta. The one is called Pearl River Delta.
Yep.
Yangtze River Delta is where Shanghai is, and Pearl River Delta is where Hong Kong is. So these areas are comparable to Western marketplaces. Like Shanghai, people get paid in certain jobs as much as people in New York. Okay. So we've got to be cognizant about that. That's number one. And then you come up to UK and the EU, and I personally support this. I mean, in our country, in America too, we are basically, it's not there yet, but it's coming up. The pay transparency is extremely important because then you define the pay transparency. Number two is UK. That's my second home. You also have gender pay gap.
Yeah.
That is a must, absolutely a must. So that's I wanted to bring it to your attention.
I guess, not only knowing the rules, but having cross cultural awareness. And I think maybe that's
That is
where
true.
your experience has really helped you because you understand the culture and the places you're making the plans for, right? You understand what's important to them and their values, not to say that they're a monolith, but you get the,
That's a very good point. They're not monoliths, right? Let me just give you 2 examples before we go. We still have some time. I'm not babbling, right?
no, it's good. I enjoy the stories. This is great.
So basically what happened was I was in Zurich, right? Of course, my wife grew up in England, so she speaks all the different languages, you know. So the guy who I was meeting with, and of course I had my boss with me. So we were in Zurich. So I walked in and I basically wished him, Guten Morgen. So he just raised a little, okay. Then of course we had the conversation. Before I left, I basically told him, Dankeschön. I tried my best to put
Yeah.
good German accent. Shook hands and I said, Guten Tag. So he was just like floored. Here's this Indian guy from New York
Yeah.
talking to me in German. Okay, what's up with that? And then I was actually working for a Japanese company here in New Jersey. So I met this guy who's a Japanese executive from Tokyo. So I shook his hand and I said, Ohayo gozaimasu. O genki desu ka? Good morning, how are you? He was like, you are speaking in Japanese. What's up with you? Okay. And then finally, I actually was telling you that I met somebody. I actually went to some folks from the Middle East. I actually met somebody from Saudi Arabia and Iran. I basically shook their hands and I said, Salam alaikum. They was like, oh my God. So I think it is extremely important. You know this.
Mhm.
It is, you need to have like, what's the icebreaker? I think that's what it's called, right? You basically address them in their own language.
Yeah.
I mean, like
No, and
if
people are
you,
flattered and appreciated and surprised. I've seen that myself, so I
yes,
can relate to that. And but that's the cross cultural awareness too. That's just meeting people where they are
yeah, right.
and being that global traveler. So I think we can end the podcast saying to everybody, get a passport and see the world, because not everybody
Exactly.
lives like us, and you gotta open your mind to different ideas, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that is a very good point because I've traveled all over the place and we're all human beings, So we have the same issues wherever we live and there's nothing different from here to there.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. Well, we'll leave it at that, and appreciate you on
Sure.
the podcast today. That was great.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. And we can catch up possibly next week.
Absolutely.
All right. Send